I have lived long enough to know that the best things that ever happened on this ranch did not happen because I planned them. They happened because I kept the door open, put enough food on the table, and paid attention to who walked in. My 75th birthday party is a good example of that. My daughter-in-law Rosamond had been planning the thing since February. 3 days of it, she said, and she meant it. Families came in from the far end of the valley, from the Sutter Creek Road, from as far as the Tolliver place at the base of the Drum Ridge. We set up plank tables in the yard and hung lanterns from the porch beams, and my son Harlan hauled in 2 barrels of apple cider from the Raber farm, and 1 fiddle player turned into 3 by the second night, because fiddles in a valley find each other the way water finds low ground. I was 75 years old, and I had been a rancher since I was 19, and I was not a sentimental man. But I will tell you that standing on my own porch on a May evening, with lantern light falling across 24 people I had known most of my life, I felt something that I did not have a word for then, and do not have one now. Near enough to grateful, near enough to full. That was when Pell Vance rode in with his cousin. I had met Pell twice before. Both times I came away feeling like I needed to wash my hands. He was a land broker out of Cutter's Bend, the kind of man who smiles with all his teeth and none of his eyes, and he had written me 3 weeks prior to say he was coming to the party and bringing his young cousin who was looking for a schoolteacher's post in the valley. Would I put in a word with the school board? I said I would, because the valley needed a teacher, and I did not yet know what Pell was. The cousin's name was Cora Beale. She was somewhere in her late 20s, dark-haired, with a straight back and steady eyes, and the particular look of a woman who has been taking care of herself for long enough that she does it without thinking about it anymore. She shook my hand and thanked me for the invitation and asked intelligent questions about the school and the students and the length of the term. I liked her inside of 5 minutes. Pell stood at her elbow the whole time, just a half step behind her, and he smiled that tooth-heavy smile, and I felt the first pull of unease without knowing exactly why. The evening went on. The fiddles started up. Rosamond's cooking, which is the finest cooking in 3 counties, and I say so without bias, filled every table, and the children ran between the lanterns, and old Burl Haddon fell asleep in a camp chair before 9 o'clock, as he always does, and someone covered him with a quilt, as we always do. The party was everything Rosamond had planned it to be. And then Reed Calloway rode in. He came in from the North Road, which meant 3 days in the saddle from the Sage Flat country, where he ran his drives. He was 41 years old, trail-hardened, quiet in the way that some men are quiet when they have spent more years working alone than working with people. He tied his horse at my rail, came up the porch steps, and put his hand out to me, and I took it. He said, "Happy birthday, Elias. Sorry I'm late. The Morrow Creek crossing was running high." I said, "You rode 3 days." He said, "You gave me honest work in the winter of '68, when I had nothing. 3 days is nothing." That was the longest speech I ever heard Reed Calloway make, and I have known the man for 11 years. He got a plate and found a place at the end of one of the long tables and ate without drawing attention to himself, which was not difficult, because Reed Calloway had the gift of being entirely still. He was a big man, rangy, with a face that had been weathered into something that looked carved from the same material as the country he worked in. He wore his hat all through supper the way a man does when he means to leave early, and he nodded when people spoke to him, and he did not speak unless spoken to, and he watched the party the way a trail boss watches a herd, with a wide, patient attention that did not appear to miss much. It was maybe an hour after he arrived, getting on toward 9:30, when Pell Vance stood up. He did it between songs, in the silence, while the fiddle players traded out their resin. He stood at the head of the long middle table, with a glass in his hand, and he cleared his throat, and he smiled. He said he was grateful to be at such a fine celebration and so on, the kind of preliminary language men like Pell use to make a room feel like it owes them something. And then he said he had an announcement to make, and he looked at Cora, and something happened to her face. I had been watching her most of the evening, the way you watch someone you have decided to like and want to see have a good time. What happened to her face when Pell said those words was not a smile. It was not fear exactly either. It was the particular stillness of a woman who has just understood something and is calculating, very quickly and very quietly, whether she has any room to move. She did not have any room to move. Pell had made sure of that. We were 3 days from the nearest town. Every family in the valley was in this yard. Pell's announcement, that he had arranged for his cousin Cora to be married to a man named Dorn Lace, a land associate of his from over the ridge, who was present at the party and who was owed a debt that Pell had incurred and was settling in this fashion, landed in the middle of that yard like a stone in a still pond, and every ring it made was another reason for a woman in Cora's position to understand that saying no in public, alone, with no advocate, was going to cost her something she might not be able to afford. Dorn Lace was already on his feet. He was a thin man with pale eyes and an air about him of a man who has decided in advance that the answer is yes. The yard went quiet. The way a yard goes quiet when something has happened that nobody is sure they witnessed correctly, and everyone is waiting for someone else to be the first to speak. I was 75 years old. I started to push back my chair. Reed Calloway was faster. He did not stand up quickly. He did not make a sound. He simply set down his fork, reached up, and placed his hat on the supper table in front of him, and that one small act, the deliberate setting down of a man's hat at a table where he intended to say something, was enough to pull every eye in the yard to him before he said a single word. He looked at Pell. He said, "The lady hasn't been asked." Pell's smile stretched the way a rope stretches when there's weight on it. He said that the arrangement was between him and Lace, and it was Cora's family business. Reed said, "She's sitting right there." The second sentence was quieter than the first. That was the thing about Reed Calloway that I had understood for 11 years, and that Pell Vance had not had time to learn. The man got quieter when he meant something, not louder. He turned his head then, and he looked at Cora Beale. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he is offering a door to, not pushing her through it. A look that said the next word in this conversation belongs to you, and I will stand here as long as it takes. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, to Pell, in a voice that was entirely steady, "I don't consent to this arrangement. I came here for a teaching post. That is the only agreement I made." Pell started to speak. Reed said, "She's answered." 2 words. The yard was very still. Dorn Lace sat down. I do not know if it was the way Reed said it, or the size of the man saying it, or the quality of the silence he brought with him, or simply the fact that sometimes a single honest voice in a room is enough to remind everyone in it what they already knew was right. Probably some mixture of all 4. But Pell Vance looked around at 24 families he did not know well enough to spend social capital with, and he found no ally, and the smile left his teeth, and he sat down. The fiddle players looked at each other. One of them started a reel, quietly, the way you restart a fire after the wind has passed through. Rosamond, who does not miss anything that happens in a yard she is feeding people in, appeared at Cora's elbow with a fresh plate of biscuits and said, in the most ordinary tone in the world, that there was a school board meeting Tuesday week, and she would be happy to make introductions. The party breathed again. I watched Reed Calloway pick up his hat and put it back on his head and return to his plate. Cora Beale said something to him. I was too far to hear what, and he said something back, and she nodded once, and there was no more to it than that. No grand moment, no speech. 2 people at the end of a long table, speaking quietly while the fiddles played. Pell Vance left early the next morning. He did not say goodbye. Dorn Lace rode out with him, which was the last I ever heard of either of them. Cora Beale stayed 3 days, as invited, and talked to the school board as Rosamond arranged, and was offered the post on Thursday morning. She accepted it. She moved into the schoolhouse at the end of the valley, before the end of May. Reed Calloway, who had intended to leave the morning after the party, did not leave until Sunday. He spent Saturday helping Harlan rehang the big gate on the south pasture, which had been giving us trouble since March, and which I had mentioned to him for 30 seconds in passing the night before. He did not mention that he was staying. He simply appeared at the gate with a post iron at first light, and Harlan found him there, and the 2 of them worked until noon. I have thought about those 2 days, that Friday evening and that Saturday morning, more times than I can count in the years since. I was 75 years old and I have lived to be 83, and I have had occasion to watch a great many things happen in this valley, and I will tell you what I believe. I believe a man's character is what he does when he has no particular reason to do anything. Reed Calloway had ridden 3 days to put his hand in mine and eat 1 plate of food at my birthday party. He had no stake in Cora Beale's situation. He did not know her. He owed her nothing. He had nothing to gain from speaking, and nothing to lose from staying quiet, the way most people in that yard stayed quiet. He spoke because a woman was sitting alone, without anyone to stand for her, and he had a voice, and he used it. He rehung the gate because it needed rehanging, and he was there, and it was the kind of work a man does when he is in the habit of leaving places better than he finds them. Cora Beale taught in the Valley School for 2 years. She was, by every account I have heard, a very fine teacher. In the spring of her 2nd year, Reed Calloway rode in from the Sage Flat country with a proposition that had nothing to do with debt arrangements, or family business, or any kind of arrangement at all. He asked her. She took a week to decide. She said yes on a Tuesday. They married in June, at this ranch, on the same patch of ground where the supper tables had been. Rosamond cooked. The fiddle players came back. Cora wore her good dress, and Reed wore his hat until she told him to take it off, and he did, which is probably the only time in his adult life that man has taken that hat off without being specifically asked. I have been to a great many celebrations on this piece of ground. I was born here, and I will likely die here, and I have been glad of it every one of those years. But that June wedding is the one I come back to, when I want to remember what this valley is, and what it can be, and what a man is worth, when he knows the difference between what belongs to him and what belongs to the person standing next to him. Reed Calloway rode 3 days to shake an old man's hand. He stayed a great deal longer than that. We were all the better for it.